All right, we're here then with a new episode. How's it going?
It's going well. It's going well. Thanks for having me, Tomer. Appreciate it. Glad to be doing this. And yeah, first time Riverside user, so enjoying it so far.
There's a rumor this is your first podcast. Is that true?
The rumor is accurate. It is my first podcast, and I will say it's a long time coming because as they say in the radio world, long time listener, first time caller. So long time listener, first time participant for podcasts. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. So I hope it'll be a gentle first time for you. Let's start with a intro. Who is Yonatan Mandelbaum? Give us the scoop.
Yeah, look, I grew up in the States in Cleveland, Ohio, born and raised, massive Cleveland sports fan, mostly unfortunately. But I did get to grow up with LeBron James as the massive sports figure in my life, which is something that I'm very fortunate and grateful for. And then I moved to Israel when I was 18, right after I finished high school, spent a year actually learning in a religious seminary out here in Israel. Went into the military for a few, as all Israelis do, into a combat unit and enjoyed that. That was definitely an interesting experience, a meaningful experience, a difficult experience, but spent a couple years doing that. And then very haphazardly found my way into venture capital, which I don't think many people do right after finishing their combat service in the military, but a lot of serendipity, right place, right time, and work at a brand new early stage venture capital firm here in Israel for a couple of years. And that was really my education into what is a startup even, what is technology, what is investing. And after that, moved over to the current fund that I've been working for, TLV Partners, and that was about 6 years ago. So professionally, all I know is early stage venture capital, for better or for worse. But I absolutely love it and feel very privileged to be doing it. And so yeah, that's me. And probably the more important things is I'm married to Sarah and a father of two beautiful young daughters. So that's me in a quick nutshell for sure.
Awesome. That's a classic Ole Hadash story, except for the VC part.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even so, I would say that there's a lot of Olim in high tech these days, in venture capital also. So maybe it's a classic Ole story.
No, it has a twist. The VC part, so young, is uncommon. All right, so we have a few interesting topics. Let's dive in. You have an interesting background in the fact that you started from the bottom in terms of the VC hierarchy, and you've seen a lot in these two funds you've worked at. Let's talk a bit about the typical VC hierarchy.
For sure, yeah. So I would say that when you ask about VC hierarchy, you're also specifically focused on the investment team, right? Because there are also non-investment professionals at a venture capital firm, and usually they're a little bit outside of the classic VC hierarchy. And so focusing on the investment side of a VC firm, I would say that there's about 4 different levels in a classic structure. The analysts are the bottom of the totem pole. They're usually just starting out their career, their first or second job maybe in the workforce, and they're usually not very involved in the decision-making process. They're on the investment team. Right on top of that, you have what's referred to as an associate, and these are either analysts with an MBA, or they're analysts that have a little bit more experience and so have moved up one rung on the totem pole. After that, you have what's either called VP, vice president, or principal. That's actually what I am today, a principal. And these are individuals that usually have quite an amount of experience already in the space, or some type of translatable experience in another field, product management, consulting, investment banking, etc. And usually they're much more heavily involved in the investment decision process. Maybe they can even make investments themselves. And then after that is the partner level. And even within the partner level, there can be hierarchy. There are general partners, there's managing partners, there's junior partners, there's venture partners. But essentially, someone with the partner title can more or less make their own decision. Again, nuances, but those are 4 different rungs of the VC totem pole hierarchy.
You started at the intern level. What was your journey like?
Yeah, I guess it's a good question. I would say when I started at the first firm that I worked for, which was a firm called iAngels, I think even intern would have been a nice description of what I was doing. But officially, yes, started my role as an analyst there, and then as an associate at TLV Partners, and now a principal. So I'm on level 3 of the game, I would say. Yeah.
Almost to the top. When we were talking about this podcast, you mentioned the interesting topic about the main reasons why founders are hesitant to engage with a non-partner in the VC firm.
So I think it's a great question, and it's a topic that I think I'm pretty opinionated about, obviously because I have my own experiences. Ego might have been hurt 1 or 2 times as well. but ultimately because founders get some bad advice when it comes to this. The traditional wisdom that founders are often told is that it's not worth wasting your time on speaking to any investor that doesn't have the partner title. The reason being is because they can't make a decision. They're not the decision maker. And why waste your time on someone who ultimately cannot determine if you are or are not going to get an investment? And I would say that maybe on the surface, that makes sense. But even if you dig a little bit just under the surface of understanding how a venture capital firm works, I think that not only is that wrong, but I think it's pretty detrimental advice to founders. And we can go through the reasons why. So first and foremost, you need to understand that venture capital firms, for the most part, and this is, I would say, very much 80 to 90% of venture capital firms are small organizations, right? You don't have hundreds of people working at a VC. You have tens, and sometimes only between 10 and 20. And the reason why that's important is because every single person that is hired and that is part of the investment team has a voice, and that voice has influence even on the partners who are ultimately making the decision. And not only do they have a voice, and not only are they influential, but they were hired in order to ultimately help the partners find the right investments for them to make. Okay, so first of all, their job is literally to help the partners find the right companies to invest in. And so if you are a founder or an entrepreneur and you get reached out to by an analyst, by an associate, by a principal, you have to understand that their goal is to find investments, because not only is that what they were hired to do, but that is also the way that you move up the totem pole that we were talking about, right? One of the easiest ways for you to progress in your career through venture capital is, can you bring interesting companies into the fund that ultimately the partners invest in, right? Which is what's referred to in the VC world as sourcing. Can you source interesting deals? And so I might be reaching out to lots of different founders on any given day. And yeah, if I'm an associate or an analyst, I can't make the decision to invest. However, I am heavily incentivized to bring you through the process at my fund to ultimately get you an investment. That is what is best for me. It's best for you as the founders. There's a real alignment of interest between these non-partners, the actual founders. Now, there's one other reason why I think that it makes a lot of sense, besides for the fact that there's an alignment of interest, and this is actually their job, is to find interesting investments. And it's because ultimately, like any sales process, you need to find a champion within the organization. And sometimes the decision maker is not the initial champion, right? Even in B2B sales, like you might be selling to the CISO, but ultimately someone a little bit under the CISO is actually the champion of the deal that brings it and convinces the CISO to ultimately make the purchase. And same thing here. If you can get one of the junior investment team members to be your champion, you can get an incredible amount of insight into how to navigate the process. And you ultimately have someone on the inside that is trying to force your way through to get that investment. That's an incredibly powerful thing to have in a process. And so I think that ultimately there's nuance involved. And if you're a founder and you know that you're speaking to an analyst and an associate, and it's been 1 meeting and 2 meetings and 3 meetings and 4 meetings, and you still haven't met a partner, I think that then it is okay to say, hey, when are we getting a partner? When are we getting a decision maker involved? And that's probably already too far past the stage where you should be asking that question. I think that in order to start a process with a VC firm, I almost think that starting with an analyst, an associate, or a principal is sometimes a benefit to doing it. And so there's, of course, nuance involved, but that's my diatribe about why you should definitely speak with non-investment partners at VC firms.
This is under the assumption that you don't have a direct relationship with one of the partners.
It is and it isn't. I would say the easy answer is yes, it is. The longer answer is not necessarily, because I think that founders need to be self-aware. I know that what I'm about to say, I might get some heat for, but I think founders need to be self-aware as to what is their pedigree. Because ultimately, and especially for early stage investments, again, the caveat, I'm mostly a seed investor, a little bit Series A, but early stage investment wise, the most critical part of being able to raise a round is, what is your background, what's your pedigree, and how are you viewed by the investment community? And yes, if you are a serial entrepreneur, or if you've worked at some of the hottest companies in the ecosystem, and you have direct, very strong relationships with partner level individuals, then of course, there's no reason to speak to a non-investment partner. You should speak with the partner, and I think that's taken for granted. But I think that even if you have a relationship with a partner, however that's been established, but you don't necessarily have that pedigree, you don't necessarily have that background, I think that it still would do that founder to start with someone a little bit more junior to help them navigate the process within the fund, because each fund's process is different than the next. And it is helpful to have someone on the inside to make sure that you can navigate that process the right way. But the short answer is yes. If you have a direct relationship, go to the partner. Yeah.
No, the advice sounds like a reasonable recommendation to use the more junior investment member to understand how to pitch the partner, maybe some back channeling. What would be your ideal way to communicate with two stakeholders at the same firm? Would you recommend founders they have a back channel with the associate while they officially pitch the partner?
That's a good question. I don't necessarily think that I have a recommendation for what you should do. I think that having a back channel is incredibly helpful, but also would recommend founders to be careful about seeking that out. Again, I think that mostly my advice is if you get reached out to by a junior investment team member, you should definitely take the meeting or take the call and start developing that relationship. I wouldn't necessarily specifically seek out a relationship or a second relationship to have a back channel, just because, look, at the end of the day, also, you have to understand where my loyalties lie. And the loyalties of even junior investment team members ultimately will lie with their fund, except for very rare scenarios where if you develop a very deep relationship with that person, then perhaps their loyalties will lie more with you than with their own fund. But it's going to be impossible, nearly impossible for you to figure that out ahead of time. And so I think that it's best to be careful. But ultimately, again, if you get proactively reached out to by a junior investment team member, then it's definitely worthwhile to spend the time, cultivate that relationship. Again, with the ultimate goal of getting to the partner and having the partner make that decision to invest.
Are there situations where it would be best to not engage with this non-partner, maybe some non-genuine interest? Is there a way to detect that? Does that happen?
I think that there's one easy way to detect that. When you're speaking to a firm that has 50 to 75 people on the investment team, and an analyst or an associate is reaching out to you out of the blue, and on the call, you can tell that they're going through a prepared list of questions. And I'm not going to name any funds by name here, but there are a few funds that are very notorious for this, that their job is actually to go out and collect information, collect data about companies, because maybe they do want to invest at some point. It's not completely nefarious, but they're ultimately on a data collection mission. And I think there, again, the telltale signs for this is one, the firm is very big and they have a lot of people on the team, 50 plus people on the team. And second of all, you can tell on the call that they're reading off of a script and reading a prepared list of questions, very specifically focused on your traction and the numbers and your KPIs. I think that there you should very quickly understand that there's not really genuine interest in investing, and you should probably end the call sooner rather than later. Aside from that, I think that it's going to be hard because VCs are pretty well versed in being politically correct, especially American VCs, but Israeli VCs as well. And so more often than not, you're going to leave the call feeling like the conversation was pretty positive. But then it's all about sort of the follow-ups and how they interact after the meeting. But that's a whole different conversation as well.
Got it. All right, let's move on to a different topic. Podcasts. So you told me a few weeks ago that you listen to 2.5 hours of podcasts per day at a speed of, what was that, 2x? More than 2x?
It's between 2 and 2.5x, depending on what the podcast is. Yeah.
All right. So what initially drew you to this love of podcasting?
Yeah, so the first thing that drew me to it was just practicality. So I have about an hour commute into the office every single day, each direction, right? So I have 2 hours a day and I'm driving, right? I'm not on the train. I'm not on a bus. I don't have the option to take out my laptop and actually do some work or even to watch a TV show. The only thing that I can really do is either calls or I can be listening to podcasts. And so the first reason that I got into podcasting was mostly out of practicality to occupy myself. And then actually what was interesting is during COVID, there was an explosion of really good content and I was home. So I didn't actually have my commute, but there were so many podcasts that I wanted to listen to and all I had was time. And so I just decided to train myself to listen to faster speeds. And so ultimately got to about 2.5x is where I feel very comfortable listening to podcasts. But there's a few podcasts where I have to take it down to 2.1 or 2x as well. And yeah, on any given day, I'm listening to, I would say, anywhere between actually closer to 3.5 hours of podcast content a day. And it's fantastic. And it's my preferred method of media consumption for sure.
That's interesting. You said you trained yourself. How does one train themselves to listen to 3x or 2x?
Yeah, I might be giving myself a little bit too much credit. Ultimately, I just listened on 1.2x for a few weeks, and then I went up to 1.5, and then I went up to 1.8, and then up to 2. I just kept on increasing the speed as the sort of the audio became normal for me. So nothing too impressive. Although I will say that a feature that I think that would be amazing for Spotify to incorporate at some point would be for me to be able to set a goal for myself that I
Uh,
want to be able to listen at 2x speed within a month. And then Spotify would automatically be able to adjust the speed during podcast episodes to start getting me used to things. And all of a sudden, I would just be at 2x without even realizing it. I think that'd be a very interesting random feature for them to incorporate. But either way, I'll let when Spotify gives me a call to ask for product feature requests, I'll let you know. Yeah,
yeah, it's a nice hack for them how to increase the KPI of listening time. It'll increase
for
everything
sure.
by a lot.
Exactly.
Another thing we've been talking about.
Yeah. We'll get on the phone and we'll take care of it.
Yeah, he's here on my WhatsApp. Let me bring him in. So another thing when we were talking about is how podcasts is merging with the world of social media, especially with the rise of these new not so social platforms like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts. Do you think that more companies should take their content in this direction? There's this whole mantra, every company needs to be a media company. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. Look, I think that at the end of the day, something that I'm sure everyone has experienced at this point is you're on TikTok or you're on YouTube Shorts or you're on Instagram and you see a small clip of some type of podcast because podcasts now are all being recorded over video as well, just like this conversation that we're having right now. And it's just a very easy way to repurpose content if you are a content creator. And you start seeing this sort of with the classic content creators. But the truth is that it becomes very interesting for businesses as well. And I think that the reason why it's so compelling is because audio is such a rich format to capture the attention of your audience. It's a rich format because if you think about it, the human brain has been trained and has gone through evolution to be able to pick up information and to learn information through audio, through listening, right? Whether it's listening to our surroundings or whether it's listening to other humans around us. The best way and the most tried and true method for passing information from one person to another is through talking to each other, is through listening to one another. And so if our brains are hardwired to consume and to learn information that way, then that's also the way that our brains are consumed to be most engaged and to interact with. And so if I'm a business, if I'm an individual content creator or an influencer or whatever you want to call whoever I am, if I'm trying to get a message across to somebody else, I need to have some type of audio aspect of what I'm doing. And of course, if where the eyeballs are today are on video consumption channels, whether so in the short form video content like TikTok, etc., then why not leverage both together, but ultimately push people towards my long form audio content in order to get people most engaged? And I think that's ultimately where this stems from, just because it's the best form of transferring knowledge is through audio.
Yeah, and I think one of the big plagues of podcast was always monetization, which is directly correlated with discovery. And I think that's something that these video channels, they do much better than the strictly audio platforms like Spotify, which isn't the easiest to discover.
Yeah, for sure. And the truth is, I think that monetization on podcasts has actually gotten very good. But I think you hit the nail on the head. The problem, though, is discovery is almost impossible on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, etc. And yes, definitely on these other platforms, on the video first platforms, discovery is something that they've definitely cracked. TikTok's For You page is often, for me, much more engaging than even my TikTok following page, which is a little bit counterintuitive because I guess I should be following different accounts at that point. But yeah, the discovery aspect is incredibly powerful. But that's why I think you see the marriage of both, right? Where the discovery, it's an interesting paradox, actually, because if you speak to creators, monetization on TikTok is actually terrible. Monetization on YouTube Shorts is a little bit better because YouTube has always been very good at monetization. But that's why you see a lot of creators there, they will hook you in with the discovery on TikTok, YouTube Shorts, etc. But they will very quickly be trying to push you to their Spotify, to their Patreon, whatever else it might be, because it's much easier to monetize you on those other platforms. And so I think it's actually pretty interesting to think about who's going to get better at which first. Is TikTok or are the other video platforms, are they going to get better at monetization? Or are Spotify and the other platforms going to get better at discovery? Maybe they never converge, but I assume that both categories are working very hard on solving that other aspect out.
Yeah, I think they're definitely gonna start entering each other's worlds and start cannibalizing each other. I think it'll be a true test of who can move the quickest and has the strongest moat to see if any one of them can actually kill the other or take their side of the business. But it sounds like together they could actually turn this format into something much bigger because it does solve a lot of the issues. But again, there's no denying the power and the need for long form as well. Someone asked me recently, if short form is so good at discovery and getting views and it's quick, why would people even need long form like podcasts? Why not just record only short form and that's it? I think what you mentioned, right, with the monetization is probably the right answer. It's hard to monetize 30 seconds.
Definitely. Super hard to monetize 30 seconds, much easier to monetize an hour-long piece of content. And I think that's something maybe a little bit more romantic. A more romantic answer to that would also be is that, again, I think at the end of the day, humans strive connection. We're looking to connect with one another. We're looking to connect with others. And I can connect to somebody else only so much in a 30-second clip. But after listening to you speak for an hour, I'm going to get the feeling that I know you pretty well, even if I don't. You might be a completely different persona, but if I listen to you for 1 hour, I have a pretty good understanding of who you are, and I'll feel connected to you. And now let's compound that. If I listen to you an hour a week, if I listen to you 2 hours a week, I might feel like you're one of the closest people in my life. And the truth is that I feel that way towards a lot of the podcasts that I listen to on a regular basis. I feel like these individuals are part of my daily experience, my human experience. Of course, it's a complete one-way street. They don't even know my name and have no relationship with me. But I think it's very part of the human experience is we're looking for that interaction. We're looking for that connection. And I think that it's something that you simply cannot replace with short form content. And that's why long form will always be there.
That's so interesting that you mentioned that. It reminds me of something that happened a few weeks ago. I was giving a panel discussion at a local meetup in Tel Aviv. And apparently I said a few things that were smart. So a few people lined up at the end to ask me some questions. And there were 3 people that came up.
Nice.
And they asked me a few questions, the standard stuff. One of the people said he listened to my podcast. I have another podcast in Hebrew. And he's been listening it for months. And I can just sense the way he was talking to me. It felt like he was talking to a friend. And it was completely one-sided. I've never met this guy before, but he was talking to me like I'm his friend because he apparently listened to hours of my content and felt like we have some connection. I think that's a really strong and powerful connection, which is not so easy to develop on 5 seconds, 10 seconds, video, something you're just scrolling through.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. It makes a lot of sense. Not surprised at all. And yeah, I'm sure that was a weird thing to experience for you. And by the way, I think that there's to put my VC hat on for a second, I think there's some really interesting opportunities in the whole sort of audience engagement side of creators, podcast producers, whatever it is, because I think that your experience is definitely not one that you experience in a vacuum. It's something that creators are experiencing all over the world. And there's an opportunity to be able to break through the looking glass there. But anyways, yeah, cool story and makes a lot of sense for sure.
Yeah. It reminds me of also here in the local market, there's this really famous radio couple, Aviad and Tal Aviad. And they've been doing it for 15 years or 20 years, a long time. A lot of people, including myself, grew up listening to this in the background. And when they announced that they were stopping the show, the amount of comments on social media and that people that were so sad, it's like their best friends are getting divorced or something. Also shows the power that audio has over human connections.
100%, 100%. Yeah, and that's why I'm long podcasts. There's a lot of other reasons, but I think just like the ability to establish a really strong human connection between the producer and the listener, I think it's really unparalleled in other type of content creation. So I'm long podcasts for sure.
So let's talk a bit about business and startups. Let's get back to the money. So there was a lot of activity recently with
Yeah.
enterprises and podcasts. HubSpot is one of the leading players. They've acquired over 35 podcasts, including they paid $17 million for My First Million. So they're spending quite a bit of money on podcasts. What's your outlook on, do podcasts and enterprise and business converge at some point? Is it a fading trend? Where do you see this going?
Yeah, I obviously think that it's something that we're going to see more and more of. You mentioned it before, how every company is a media company. And I think that the real sort of way to phrase it is every company needs to have a media strategy. And again, I think that ultimately, what are companies trying to do? Every company, no matter what product you're selling, you are trying to create a community of your customers or users, whatever it is. And the question always is how to create the most engaged community and ultimately how to do that at the most sustainable and unit economic friendly price point as well. And so historically, there are lots of different strategies to do this. Product-led growth is one of the ways that has gotten most popularity in the venture community recently. And there's even a subset of that called community-led growth. And again, these are mostly structured around innovations on the product side or innovation on more classic offline community building methodologies. But I think that something that you met, HubSpot is a perfect example, but I think a lot of companies are going to start exploring is where does our subset of customers or users already reside? What are they already listening to? What content are they already consuming? And if I can somehow incorporate that into my offering, even if it's in a very, and hopefully it's in a very subtle way, ultimately, it might be a steep price point off the top, but in the long term, it's going to be a significantly more scalable way of getting to customer base, the community that I'm ultimately trying to cultivate. And there are several podcasts that I listen to that I am an avid listener of, that I know that there are hundreds of thousands of avid listeners of as well. And if ultimately that would be acquired by some other large company, by, for example, Spotify, then perhaps that would make me switch. And that is exactly what happened. I am an iPhone owner, and I was using Apple Podcasts for a very long time. But I'm also a very big fan of The Ringer, which is Bill Simmons' media company, mostly sports podcasts, but some media podcasts as well. And about a year and a half ago, I think maybe 2 years ago, it was announced that they were acquired by Spotify. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And at some point, I decided, you know what, maybe I should give this Spotify app a try. And obviously heard of it, but was not on Spotify before, was using Apple Music, was using Apple Podcasts. And now I'm an avid Spotify user. And that's 100%, what Spotify was thinking with the acquisition is just access to a bunch of people who already listen to podcasts, but are not necessarily on the Spotify platform. So that's one very obvious example, but I think it's going to start being adopted by many companies in the coming years. And it's exciting. It's exciting to see which companies adopt that first, because right now I think it's still a pretty big blue ocean out there to be able to do this in an efficient way. But I think it's only going to get more and more expensive. So the time is now. The time is now.
I think it's a great time. Many podcasts are making close to nothing, right? Because monetization is very tough. If this could be an interesting strategy, maybe someone listening wants to give it a try. If you're a tech company and you're looking to make some interesting investments that could give you very low CACs in the future, you should consider purchasing a podcast that your customers already listen to, that has an existing listen base, and perhaps even some loyalty that you can, I'm not sure if it's rent or buy, but acquire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. 100%. Yeah, this should definitely be happening. I think just one other example that I know is already happening, and I'm sure there are other examples that we're not aware of, but another really good example of this is also in the sports world, but more specifically in the sports world, where there are all of these, I would say, hardcore fan-driven podcasts. For example, I'm a big fan of the Cleveland Cavaliers NBA team, and about 2 or 3 years ago, there was a podcast started by two fans where they would get on after every single game and record a podcast recapping the previous night's game and talking about the team. It was not sponsored by the team. It had nothing to do with the team. They weren't official media members. These are two people with full-time jobs that just absolutely loved the Cavs and started a podcast about it. And he was a big Cavs fan. I got exposed to it. I started listening to it. And tens of thousands of other Cavs fans started listening to it. And about a year ago, the Cleveland Cavaliers actually acquired that podcast. And the reason is because sure, they could have gone out by themselves and hired somebody to start their own podcast internally within the organization. And maybe it would have done just as well. Maybe it would have done even better. I think they wouldn't have, by the way, but that's something neither here nor there. But for their perspective, why not just go out and acquire a listenership that's already dedicated, that already is spending an incredible amount of time on their brand? And now that it's under their umbrella organization, they have direct access, direct connection to these fans, to these users who are the people that they're trying to connect to otherwise. So again, it's something that's been done and is currently being done in other industries, whether it's the media world, whether it's sports and entertainment. And so I think it's only a matter of time. And again, you mentioned HubSpot, it's already happening, but it's only a matter of time before this becomes really prevalent in the world of startups and in the world of technology. And I think that, by the way, I've yet to be pitched as a VC. I've yet to be pitched this is a strategy by a company. But if you're out there and you're listening to this and you want to pitch that to me, I will be incredibly intrigued, and we'll definitely spend some serious time taking a look at it. So please do.
I can also imagine a marketplace that helps companies identify targets for these little content acquisitions. That can also be interesting. There's another story that comes to mind, which is on the TikTok podcast spectrum. A small company called Morning Brew acquired a company called Our Future Stories. That this company is an agency that specializes in short form content. They have one of the largest TikTok channels, which is business content for Gen Z. So you can understand that why Morning Brew would be interested in these assets. Okay, so I wanted to move to our last topic. We talked about non-partners, we talked about podcasts. Let's talk a bit about TLV Partners. Shachal from TLV Partners whispered in my ear that you're the main fintech expert in the firm. So what is the most compelling in fintech from the point of view as an investor?
For me, fintech is still and has been one of the most exciting areas for investment over the last couple of years, definitely, and still going forward. And I think one of the areas that I'm most interested in today is the shift of fintech from a sector, from an industry, to a horizontal business model or strategy. And so again, just to break that down a little bit, I think historically people have viewed fintech similar to how they view cybersecurity or how they view healthcare or how they view, the Internet of Things, right? It's a specific vertical of technology. It's a category of companies that should be focused on. And I think that was predominantly true over the last couple of years. But what we see recently is that fintech is really making this transition to touching a lot of other companies, right? And similar to what we mentioned about every company needing a media strategy, I think a lot of companies need a financial technology as well. And so the trends that I'm most excited about actually are meeting companies that from day one have a way of incorporating financial services into their offering. And so is that a fintech company? Yes, you can define that as a fintech company, but the truth is that they don't need to have any traditional characteristics of a financial services company. They can be a completely software-focused company. They can be a media-focused company. Maybe they can even be a healthcare-focused company. But if the strategy involves monetizing their user base or generating revenue from financial services, then those are the type of fintech companies that I'm most interested in seeing. And the infrastructure has been built over the last couple of years to really enable that to happen in a quick and seamless way. And just as it's easy now to obviously spin up a server on AWS, which again, 15 years ago wasn't, it's the same thing now. Spinning up a bank account or spinning up a credit card or spinning up any type of payment rails is incredibly easy today for startups to do. And so companies today that from day one are incorporating financial services as part of their strategy, those are the fintech companies that I'm most excited about going forward. And we've been seeing a lot recently. So yeah.
So you're saying these companies, their main category would not be defined as fintech, but because they added this layer, then in your eyes, they're now a fintech horizontal company. Can you give a few examples of companies that are in your portfolio or have this method?
The classic example are, what's called neobanks today, right? Which are companies that are trying to essentially replace the bank relationship in their customers' lives. And so historically, these companies would have had to either get their own what's called bank charter, which is almost impossible to do in the United States, or they would have had to go through a 2-year process of developing or establishing their own relationship with an existing bank in the US. Would have taken an incredible amount of time and engineering resources and money to put that together. But today, there's very easy infrastructure and incredible infrastructure in place, company like Unit, which we're investors of, but any of the banking as a service companies to enable that to happen really quickly and seamlessly. But I think that's a pretty trivial example and not necessarily what's maybe novel to some of the people out there who are looking at fintech. I think what's more novel is to look at any SaaS company, any software company that exists that is building software for a specific community, right? So let's make up a company right now. Let's call them Fisher Tech, right? And they are a company building a software platform for fishermen. And I don't know much about being a fisherman, but I would imagine that they have maybe inventory problems. Maybe they have problems with finding the right wholesalers or retailers to actually sell the fish that they end up catching. Maybe they have maintenance issues with their boats that they're taking out to the pier every day. Maybe you even need to build a specific CRM for fishermen to deal with all the suppliers that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. I have no idea. I know nothing about being a fisherman. This example just came into my head. But if I am building that software platform, historically, I might have charged each user, each fisherman, $50 a month to use this platform. But the truth is that instead of doing that, I could offer them the software for free, and I could find another way to monetize them through financial services. So if maybe they'll sell the fish that they catch through my platform. I'll connect and I'll bring the wholesalers onto the platform, and I'll take a percentage of each sale. Maybe I understand the very specific problems that fishermen have, and I'll say, hey, I'm building all the software for you, but actually I'll be your bank account as well. And you have a Fisher Tech bank account, and I will take various small fees on top of those services as well. Maybe because I really understand your business and how you operate, and I also have more data and more understanding of what you're actually doing on a day-to-day basis. Maybe I can give you loans at better rates than a bank can because I can understand your credit worthiness in a better way. And so instead of charging for software, I can actually monetize my user base through financial services as well. And obviously, choosing fishermen was a very interesting choice by me. I'm not sure exactly why that happened, but you can replicate what I just said across every single industry, every single niche that exists in the world. You can replicate that. And I think that's the most interesting. Those are the most interesting opportunities today. It's finding these niches, finding these underserved communities, and then using financial services to ultimately make sure that you have a business, but giving the software away for free. And that's how you build the community and your user base in the fastest way possible.
If you're able to subsidize your costs using this secondary business model, which is probably even more profitable, then you can acquire users much easier. As you mentioned, community, loyalty. You can use different strategies that your competitors, which are not doing this, can't. But can't this be copied as well, this model? How easy would it be for a company to implement? You said some of these platforms exist. They're pretty easy to turn on and off.
Yeah, I think it's pretty easy to spin up this model, right? Like, again, any of these banking as a service companies, there are lending as a service companies as well. They exist. They're only continuing to get better. And I think it's actually pretty easy to launch. And to your point, I think it's pretty easy to replicate as well. And that's okay. And that's great. I think that just like it has been for the last 20 years of the software industry, but also going forward, the competitive advantage and differentiation won't necessarily be because of business model. In certain cases, it can be. But I think the differentiation will still be around the product that you're building, right? So am I building a differentiated product or service for my customer base? Great. But like you mentioned, the best way to get to market fastest or the best way to really monetize my customers in the long term might be through financial services instead of through traditional sort of software licensing. And so, yeah, that's what I'm most excited about.
All right, so let's kind of move over to TLV Partners now. What kind of resources and support does TLV Partner offer startups they invest in? And how does this differ from other funds?
It's a great question. And start with a caveat, which is that I think that a lot of times us as investors will try to tell this long story of how we are different. We really provide value. We are the best person to have the best people to have by your side when starting a company. And I don't think that that's disingenuous. I think that when VCs and investors say this, they truly mean it and they truly believe it. I'm not accusing anybody of trying to lure people in with false promises. But what I'll say is that at TLV, our philosophy always has been and always will, is that we will do whatever we can for our companies, but ultimately the founders are the ones that determine the success or lack thereof of their companies. They're the ones that are doing 99.999% of the work. The company is going to succeed regardless of if we're investors or not. And the company is probably going to fail regardless of us or not as well. But sometimes we can maybe influence the failing of a company more. And so our approach is in Hebrew, what we like to call, or venture capital at the height of your eyes, which does not translate well into English, but ultimately what
No,
it
it
means is
doesn't.
that we go into every relationship with our founders as a true partnership. And that might sound trivial, but from our perspective, the most important thing that we have with our founders is a deep relationship. It's a personal relationship as well as a professional relationship. And while these might sound like fluffy things or cliche things to say, what we really try to establish and what we really think is the ultimate reason why founders choose to work with us and enjoy working with us is because we're just someone for them to be able to have a conversation with. And not just a conversation about business and strategy and tactics, which of course we can do and we enjoy doing. And the partners, especially the ones who started the firm, have a lot of experience in successfully doing this as well. But ultimately, we're humans. And we have that human connection with our founders, and that comes first because being a founder is really hard. It's really hard. And we're very empathetic towards that. And we understand that it's also a potentially very lonely thing to be doing. And to just be able to have someone to have that conversation with at 11 p.m. on a Thursday night before the weekend starts, or just randomly in between meetings to run an idea by, I think it's something that people maybe don't put enough focus on, but that's really the only thing that we're focused on at TLV. And we're very focused on early stage investing. We do primarily seed investing and some Series A investing. And when I say seed, the earliest seed investments that you can imagine, from the idea stage all the way through early product market fit. And I think that for these types of entrepreneurs, that's what really will potentially move the needle, is having those types of relationships. And again, I started it by saying that we as investors try to differentiate ourselves, but ultimately are all the same. And then I went on to differentiate ourselves. So again, make of that what you will. But I think that's our approach.
It's not very different from founders. We also pitch that we're the best team in the world. So it goes both ways.
You said it, not me. You said it. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any specific areas that you work with portfolio companies in the beginning?
Every company is like snowflakes. Every company is incredibly different. The founding teams are all different, made up of different people. And ultimately, the companies are targeting different markets and going after different segments, right? And so while there is a certain level of generalization that can be made towards areas that we focus on with founders, I don't think that we ever set out to push or to force a certain content or areas of help upon founders. It's a very pull, not push strategy that we have here at TLV. And there are certain founders who are very technical in background and actually need a lot more help on understanding how do you build an initial go-to-market organization? Who should you hire? Should you hire marketing first? Should you hire sales first? How do you structure commissions? How do you go about building an outbound engine versus an inbound engine? And for founders like that, 100%, we spend a lot of time working with them on just understanding the basics and putting them in the position to succeed and ultimately learn for themselves how to do it. There are other founders that might have a little bit more of the traditional business background, but actually lack some of the technical background. And we're happy to work with founders in those areas as well. Obviously, we're not going to come in and start coding, but we'll come in with various areas of expertise to help them with there. And there are some founders that have much more of an issue on company building and organizational structure. And again, it's not that we're experts in any of these areas. I think if we were experts in any of these areas, we would be building the companies ourselves. But it just having the benefit of seeing hundreds, if not thousands of companies a year, investing in about 10 companies a year, really gives us an interesting vantage point to be able to provide some guidance in these areas.
That's one of the biggest benefits of working with a very established VC. They've seen it all. And there are obviously common books they've seen that have been successful and probably also other ones that haven't been successful. I'm interested about how you guys manage the balance to provide guidance and support, but also allow these companies to operate independent and with autonomy.
From our perspective, we really try to approach our relationship with founders with as much humility as possible. And what I mean by that is we will only ever get a very specific view of what's happening in the company. We are maybe dedicating a few hours a week to each company. And the founders, you're working on it 24/7. And so there's so much information that we don't have about what's happening in your company that even if the founders try to get us up to speed and try to educate us on what's happening, we will never be able to know everything that's happening. And like I mentioned, it's definitely very pull and not push. We always give our founders the independence in order to build their own company and to ultimately be the ones to make the right decisions for their company, because we will never be able to make the right decisions for other people's company, but just making sure that they understand what we can potentially provide guidance in, and to make sure that we chime in and ask questions and are doing our duty as board members and partners of these companies to hopefully give them whatever tools we do potentially have. But ultimately, every single thing that we offer, every single thing that we potentially can do for companies, it's very much an offer. It is not something that we tell them they have to be doing. It's up to them to decide to utilize it. And ultimately, I think at the end of the day, this is what's healthiest for companies. So there are certain VCs out there who claim that if you get an investment from them, they will help take you to product market fit, and they will introduce you to these customers and that customer and these advisors and whoever it is. And that's fantastic and that's great and good for those funds. But at the end of the day, if you are a founder and you're relying on your VC to get you to product market fit or to get to your initial customers, you're just setting yourself up for failure, because VC's resources are limited and they're not always going to be able to help you continue building out whatever they're helping you build out in the beginning. And if you don't flex those muscles, if you don't learn how to do that for yourself, you're not going to succeed in the long term. And so definitely giving that independence from day one is super, super critical, and something that we definitely make sure to focus on.
I would also be pretty skeptical of a fund promising PMF if they invest. I've never been offered that. Maybe it's just me.
They're out there. Trust me.
Can you speak to any particular story that comes to mind?
It's really the late night calls or the early morning calls or the minute to minute text messages or emails. It's being available. And sports, and I'm using another sort of sports parallel here, but they often say that the best ability is availability. And I think that's really true about us as well. I think that we're really always available for our founders. And sometimes we won't be able to help. Sometimes there's a question and we don't know how to help. We don't know how to answer the question, or we don't know how to guide them in the right way. But we'll be upfront about that and we'll let them know. And when we can, of course, put whatever efforts we need to in order to make sure that we can help. But I would never go as far as to say that there's a specific anecdote or story that comes to mind where we really added that value or moved the needle. No, I would never. I think that would be very presumptuous of me to say, because ultimately it was probably much more the work of the founders that made something happen, as opposed to something that me or somebody else on the team did.
I like that. I completely understand what you mean. I think the availability is a very understated, it's very important. I have an advisor, and I remember when we started working together 5 or 6 years ago, I wanted to put a monthly session, right? Let's talk once a month. And he was like, listen, that's not going to work out great for you. Why don't we do this? You have my number. Anytime you need anything, just WhatsApp me, call me. And every time I have an issue, he always gets back to me within a few hours. And that, in my mind, is worth a lot more than maybe a scheduled checkup, because it's ad hoc, right? If I don't need it, I don't use it. And if I need a lot, I'll get a lot. If I need it at that specific moment, I'm going to get it. That's a very important thing for founders, and not to be like a constant nudge, but just waiting for that push from the founder.
Yep. 100%. Yeah, I like that a lot. And that's a really smart advisor that you have. So good on you for having that person involved.
All right, let's summarize a bit. We've talked a lot about why you should or shouldn't engage with non-partners at a VC, how you fell in love with podcasts, and a bit about the future of the industry. And we talked about Fintech. I've learned a lot. I didn't know that distinction about the business model being classified as Fintech. And a bit about TLV Partners, which sounds like a direct fund that they'll have your back and no bullshit. So yeah, I think it was a great session. Anything you want to add before we finish up?
I really appreciate the time. Always enjoy talking about things that I'm passionate about. And I think you just listed off only things that I'm passionate about. So it was a very enjoyable conversation from my perspective as well. And yeah, looking forward to seeing more of your TikToks on my feed and seeing more of the great stuff that you're working on at Audio Labs. So keep it up.
You'll start seeing yourself soon on TikTok.
Yeah. I'm worried about that. Yeah.
I'll turn you into a star. Don't worry.
All right. Sounds good.
All right, Yonatan. Have a good one. And thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks. Thanks, Tomer.